turn to Senator Booker, the chair of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Criminal Justice and Counterterrorism, for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to speak for a brief time at the top of this hearing. I would like to submit my formal opening remarks for the record. I want to share with my colleagues, there's guiding principles to this country where we aspire to the highest ideals of humanity. It's what our Constitution is based upon by our founding fathers who sought to make our nation one that best evidenced the ideals not just of humanity but of divine providence. There is from the Abrahamic faiths, there's an ideal come from Micah, what do you want, O Lord, from your people, which is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. This is one of those areas of law where we have created this disparity that to me violate those highest ideals in a way that I can't identify as great as this in other areas. I have had the privilege in my life of living in different types of communities. I lived and grew up in a wealthy community where my family was the only black family there. In communities of wealth and privilege, I saw drug use and know lots of people who were violating our laws. I've lived for the last 20 years in a low-income black and brown community, and I see the same human frailties. But the consequences for those lawbreakers is very different. And when it comes to crack and powder cocaine, it has been stunning to me to see how this law has so terribly impacted the lives of folks, many of whom who need help, many of them who need treatment, but devastated their lives with this disproportionate sentencing. I'm trying to live up to those ideals of humility. I've listened very closely to all of the arguments that have been against changing this, and I've been quite satisfied by the data. And I appreciate Chairman Grassley talking about the concerns, because both sides of the aisle share the same concern: public safety, public safety. All the data that I can find that from objective sources gives no credence or validity to some of the concerns that I hear most often. For example, in 2014, the Sentencing Commission, looking at the retroactive reduction in crack cocaine guidelines, found that retroactive sentence reductions did not result in higher recidivism rates. The data is very clear. I've heard concerns expressed about violent crime, that somehow crack cocaine users, unlike powdered cocaine users, and again, there's dramatic racial disparities, that somehow those crack cocaine users were more likely to be engaged in violent crime. So I looked with humility towards the validity of those arguments. And objective sources say time and time again, that is not the case. Again, recent data dispels this notion that crack offenses account for a higher rate of weapons possession than powder cocaine. According to the data from the USSC, in fiscal year 2020, more federal offenders charged with powder cocaine offenses carried weapons, 490, than those charged with crack cocaine offenses, 468. In fact, it's the opposite. The data shows that powder cocaine folks are more likely to have weapons. And so for me, there is no substantive reason from the actual chemical, they're the same substance, all the way to the allegations that somehow this will lead to more violence or lead to more recidivism. This is just not the case. What is the case is that this has created within our society deeper schisms along racial lines where certain people have had their lives devastated by this disparity. This is not justice. This is not those high ideals of humanity that we talk about in our most sacred civic documents, like the ideals of equal justice under the law. I am so encouraged that this is a bipartisan effort, that there are numerous Republicans in the House and Senator Portman here that are working with us in a bipartisan way to end this stain of injustice in our community. I am so happy that the very people who are out there enforcing our laws from law enforcement organizations, national district attorneys, the Americans for Prosperity, the Due Process Institute, Freedom Works, law enforcement leader after law enforcement leader are working together, from Right on Crime to the very Sentencing Project, are working together to end what is a shameful chapter in our country. You had Richard Nixon up there, and all of us are mountain ranges. I do not vilify anyone. We have all made good contributions and tough contributions. But, you know, I want to end with these words by Ehrlichman that really were at the beginnings of the war on drugs, that sought to prey upon our prejudices to somehow deal with Black communities different than others. Ehrlichman, later in his life, admitted that so much of the source of fear of Black people was a political strategy. We knew, he says, quoting him, that we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or being Black. But he says that these were the two groups that were most likely to be against them. But by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. I live in a community now that for a generation has been vilified. That on the evening news, we made people afraid, where words like super predators and others were heaped upon Black communities, and we have been devastated in this country as a result of the disproportionate incarceration of African Americans, even though there's no difference in America in the usage of drug rates along racial lines. We need to end this nightmare. It is not just hurting African American communities, it is a stain upon our highest ideals of humanity. We must, as a Senate, do as Micah commands, do justice, show mercy, and walk humbly with our Lord. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker.